Hello and welcome to a live chat here again on the Bush Bee Man Show. Luckily today for you audience, we've got David Burns joining us. He's got a YouTube channel as well, and he focuses on education, and he's been beekeeping for a fair while. And matter of fact, he's a master beekeeper, which is really cool. And he does some online courses and some mentoring, and we're really lucky to have him join us today. And we'll welcome him to the show. David, how are you?
I'm doing very good. I've always wanted to go to Australia, so here I am.
I tell you what, this is about as close as I'm going to get to America and all, probably.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting with you tonight.
Oh, thanks very much for having us. There you go, tonight there and in the morning here. It's a funny world we live in, isn't it?
It is. My wife just got back from being overseas. She was about 7 hours different. So yeah, I was always, every time I thought about calling her or checking in on her, I was like, oh, she's asleep.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. Was she over there for work or pleasure or?
A little bit of pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, cool. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, no. And does she help you with the bees, or are you like me?
She used to in the beginning. We had most of our adult children that are gone now. Most of them grew up with bees. We have 6 children, and almost all of them had their hands in hives. And especially the younger ones, when the bee business we were running really took off, it was all hands on deck. So we had a lot of our children involved in beekeeping. My wife, she did a lot of work with the bees, raising queens and everything, but not so much anymore. She shifted over now to try to make the business stuff happen. So that's more her cup of tea, I think.
It sounds a bit like my wife, same sort of thing. So yeah. It is very intense, the physical labor, I think, especially like for the ladies, the lifting and the pulling. And I reckon my lovely wife got done in one night. I had some hives in a spot where they were very sandy out the back, and I had to get them on a trailer to get them to the truck. And so they had to get moved twice. And you know how that goes when you shake them along and then you've got to move them again. They were not impressed.
Oh, yeah.
So there was lots of stings and lots of excitement. I think that was the last time she came.
Oh, yeah.
Like officially.
Yeah. My wife, she always jokes about how much physical labor there was in the beginning. When we first started out, you start off just as a hobby beekeeper, and then it kind of grows, right? So there's that moment in time when you don't really have like any kind of a tractor, a bobcat, any kind of forklifts or anything. You're basically just, trying to manhandle hives. And boy, my wife, she's had 2 knee replacements, and she says, it's because I picked up those big, heavy pallets all the time. It just ruined my knees, And I don't doubt it. It was just, you just do what you do in the beginning, thinking that, maybe I don't really need to invest in something that helped me pick up all this heavy stuff. But after a while, you're like, okay, I need to get something better than my back to move all these heavy hives. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, mate. They do weigh a fair bit. And sometimes you got to move them before the honey's actually off. And it's like,
oh yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, tell me about it. And they're awkward, jolly things to lift manually. Bad enough that they're heavy, but they're jolly awkward, even with those funny little handles that hurt your fingers.
Oh, yeah. How can anybody pick up a 300-pound hive with just your fingertips stuck in the side of a hive? It's just impractical. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if the strap or the hook lets go and then the bees are rolling down the front of your bee suit, it's never ideal.
Oh, yeah. I know. That's for sure.
Yeah, no. But anyway, that's funny though how that works. As you say, you transition from a hobby to it being a career, and by the time you get to that point with the 50 hives or whatever it is, when you think, oh, now I'm so far in now, and you're kind of so fascinated by the whole thing, that it just goes to the next bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's funny for me. I started beekeeping. A friend of mine says, "Hey, do you want to start beekeeping?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was in my early 30s, I think. I'm 63 now, so half my life I've been playing with bees. But he got me started in beekeeping. He said, we're just going to go. I didn't know anything about bees. He said, we're going to go cut bees out of a tree. A tree fell over in a storm. We'll cut the bees out with a chainsaw. We'll move the comb over into a hive, and then away we go. I'll give you a bee suit. I'll get you started with a smoker, everything. It sounded so simple, but the minute he cranked up that chainsaw, those bees were so upset with us. It was so bad. And he told me ahead of time, if you see me running, follow me. I was like, boy, if I see you running, I'm going to be ahead of you. But there were a few hours there that they got so bad with us that we did have to run into the trees to make them calm down. It actually took us several days to go back to that and get those bees out of that big fallen down tree and move the comb over. I didn't know there was a better or easier way to start beekeeping. I thought at the time everybody started that way. But lo and behold, as I got a little experience under my belt, I thought that's the worst way to start beekeeping. But over time, I just started, I eventually bought another package or two, kept expanding, and just kept reading. Back then it was there was no internet, and I think somebody handed me a ABC XYZ book on beekeeping, and I kind of read through that. It was outdated back in the 30s or something, but I mean, I just didn't really have the material and the things that people have today to study and learn and take classes and all. I just learned on my own. But I've always been someone that if I really want to know something, I'm really good at self-starting things. So it didn't take me long to kind of dig in and start learning and experimenting and expanding and talking to people that knew more than I did. So it was a fun little journey. But yeah, like you said, once you get up to 50 or 100 colonies, you realize, wow, this is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, all of a sudden it's kind of gone from a hobby and to a business, and you're like, oh Lord, here we go.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then all at once you're realizing, I need to get 20 more supers, or I need to build 15 more deep boxes, and I need to do this and that. And it's just, you start throwing money in it, like you got money to burn, and it's just like, wow, this takes a bit of money to keep all this going. Then you're trying to feed them. And I think beekeeping it has an interesting appeal to people that don't understand how I guess challenging it can be. Beekeeping can be a lot like an airplane trip. You're on the airplane, and if there's no turbulence and no incidents, it was a rather enjoyable trip. You had a Coke, some peanuts or something, it was fine. But the minute you hit turbulence, or there's a problem with the plane or something, instantly things get out of whack. And that's the way it is with beekeeping. If you start out beekeeping and you just happen to have a wonderful experience that first year, the bees are gentle, the hive expands nicely. It just
seems get a honey flow.
Yeah, honey flow. You think I can get 100 of these? This is so easy. But then once there's one little catch, one little problem, there's some kind of maybe there's a dry spell, maybe the bees have some sort of pest or disease, and all at once you're like, wow, I now got a bunch of hives with problems, and I'm not ready for that. So it's kind of tough. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it can be quite an eye-opening thing, which is why you've developed some beekeeping courses to help people over all those speed humps.
That's right.
I think one of the interesting conversations I have with new beekeepers is like they've got 5 colonies and they're saying, this is amazing. Look at this honey. I'll get 50 colonies and that'll be incredible. And I'll get, they do the maths and they extrapolate how much honey they're going to get. And I try to have a conversation with them saying, well, if you have 50 colonies versus 5, all of those colonies have to actually eat something before you get any honey.
Yeah.
So you might not be able to leave 50 colonies in the same spot and extrapolate that much extra, production, because you probably won't get any production depending on where you are. But
that's right. Yeah, it's not always what you think. You have to think about what my location is with nectar sources available, and are my bees going to make a lot of honey. I actually started beekeeping thinking that I could make money selling honey. And that was my goal. And I had big extractors and big tanks and pumps and, automated uncapping equipment, quite the operation. I bought out a commercial beekeeper, and boy, I loved it. It was so much fun, double walled tank, heated tanks and everything. It was just a ball. But a few years it ran really well, and bees produced a lot of honey, and I had been making a lot of honey and selling a lot of honey. But then after a year or two, I ran into issues here and there with the bees, trying to keep the numbers up, and then never had a problem selling the honey. It was the opposite. Like some years, the honey just wasn't there. It's just like I only have half the amount of honey this year that I had last year, and yet the demand is twice as much. Wow! And I was wanting to make more money than I made last year, but this year I'm only making half the money that I made last year with twice the work. It seemed like.
Yep. No, it's an interesting thing. The trees will flower, and the nectar won't even flow anyway to the degree of actually getting a harvest. Yeah. And hence that's why you end up moving them around to go, okay, we'll go to this source and this site, and
yeah, I know. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, but still, anyway, it's all good talking about them and meeting an impasse. That's where we're at down here in Oz at the minute, where everybody's trying to figure out what this mite incursion is going to look like. I think we've transitioning into management now, because they've kind of decided that it's been here too long to control. And I think it's in the bee pollination in the background, or, the feral colonies. Yeah. So I think it's the eradication program has kind of been put on the side, and now we've got to work out how to live with them. And of course, there's quite a lot of fear and excitement from the beekeepers that are a bit further away, and causing some divisions, I would say. But I guess the similar experience was had in the USA when all of that happened.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I got started in beekeeping about the time that, there's talk about this Varroa destructor mite, and everybody was like, oh, what's that mean? I don't know. I really don't have any yet where I live. And, and all at once people are like, wow, I've lost my colony. I remember at the time, I think I had 2 colonies, and, it was really easy to run them. And all at once they were just boom, they were just depleted and down to nothing and perished. And I don't know if I discovered it, or can't remember if another beekeeper or an inspector said, oh yeah, the Varroa mites got them. They just got too many mites in there. And ever since then, I mean, when it first happened, it was very interesting. This is my recollection of it. It may not be accurate, how things get distorted in your mind. But I remember thinking at the time that, well, this is just going to destroy, bees altogether. They're just going to be wiped off of the planet. And yet at the time I was scrambling, and beekeepers were saying, hey, you need to use this chemical, and that chemical. We had these highly dangerous chemicals that we had, and valbenate, coumaphos, we were throwing these chemicals at them. And it seemed like it was working to some degree. But then as time went by, a few years later, everybody started saying, these chemicals aren't good for bees. They're making the queen and drone sterile. It's getting absorbed in the honeycomb. You can't get rid of this chemical. We need to find a different approach. And so there was a time period where as I remember, I didn't have a lot of options. I didn't want to use the big guns that were kind of very maybe carcinogenic or bad for my bees. I didn't want to use those 2 big guns anymore. I wanted to get off the chemical treadmill, because I had already heard it was bad for bees. Mm-hmm. So I started trying to do a lot of integrated pest management, where I started doing some powdered sugar dustings, hoping mites would get knocked off with powdered sugar dustings. And then I started thinking I could breed bees that were more mite resistant. So I went after that and tinkered with that a while. And as time went on, I finally decided, I really don't like using so much treatment for my bees. So I started using more things that were I guess, manual, like a green drone comb. Started working really well for me. Powdered sugar dusting started working well, a screen bottom board. So all of these things were not very effective on their own, but together they were showing signs of me seeing less mites. And then I discovered, then I don't know how I came across this. Somebody told me, or I just thought of it. I don't remember, but that if I'm, the mites reproduce in the capped cells of the developing pupae. So I had the revelation, or I read or heard somewhere, that if you break the queen's brood cycle when the hive is really populated, then the mites aren't going to be able to reproduce as much either, because they need, her brood to reproduce on. And so I started doing that. In fact, I read some studies that showed that in Africanized bees, that's why they have less mites, is because they swarm so often. There's always a brood break. And so I started doing that. And that's still one of my number one things to go to, is actually caging the queen for a week. And in our season is usually the middle of summer, toward the end of summer, like July, August, and September. If I can break the queen's brood cycle for about a week, the number of mites that you can prevent from reproducing is quite staggering. So that's one of my go-to things too. I did an inspection of a hive that I made a video a couple of days ago, and I had not done any mite control at all season long. And I did a mite test, and on the video, I show it had 15 mites out of 300 bees, which is 5%. And we usually say, 3% or less is what we need to keep it under. And so that's a hive that it's not, terribly high, but yet it is. So I need to drop. I like to use Formic Pro. It's a formic acid on pads that I can use to knock those mites down pretty quick. It's a flash burn, so to speak. So we have a lot of tools now with oxalic acid, Formic Pro. We have Apifar, Apiguard, and so many different treatments that some of those are not so potent, I guess, on bees, and some are. So a beekeeper just has to weigh that out. What kind of approach do I want to take? But I'll tell you that what I've experienced the most is that if I keep my mite levels down all year, which takes a tremendous amount of work, if I can keep the mite level low, below 3%, even 2 or 1% all year long, the bees will do much better. Absolutely. The colony that has 15 mites now, it's in jeopardy of not making it through winter for me, because mainly those mites will spread viruses. And so even though I could burn all the mites off with Formic Pro, I'm not sure if the level of viruses that they've been transmitting, I don't know how. There's no way to measure that. There's no way for me to know. I mean, I might be able to see deformed wing virus, but if I don't see that, then they could all be infected with viruses that I don't know. So I can get rid of the mites, but it's going to take, it's risky, because bees feed each other mouth to mouth. They spread viruses. So the best I can do now is hope that they don't have a lot of viruses and kill the mites, and cross my fingers. So that's kind of my journey, I guess, in a quick few minutes there. But one thing that I've noticed that, and I know in Australia, you guys probably are thinking, oh my gosh, like I did, this is going to be just the worst thing ever. I don't know what's going to become of it. But it is manageable. Here in the States, it's become very manageable. I think most of us have figured out ways that works for us, and that can be different where you live. Less humidity, more humidity, your environment, the nectar flows and all that. It changes, but most of us have learned to deal with mites and to live with them, and yet try to keep our bees somewhat not so affected by them by reducing the number of mites. But that's the number one thing that we talk about. It really is. All the beekeeping courses, everything we teach, we always say, and it was a hard road to hoe, because in the beginning, when I started teaching people about beekeeping, it was hard to get people to realize mites were a problem, because a lot of people can't really see them. If you don't have really good eyesight, you don't see them. And so a lot of people kept saying, I don't have mites. I don't have them. Well, they just didn't see them. They had them. And so it was hard, but over time, we've finally reached a point, I'd say in the last 5 or 6 years, as that new beginners realize that mite control is one of the foremost things that you need to do. You got to have a good laying queen, keep mites under control, and good nutrition. And then you can have a pretty strong colony.
Yeah, because I was reading some articles about the mites and the way they multiply, and I thought it was a bit of a hairy calculation, because it was kind of like every female mite will lay 6 new mites, and then those 6 mites will lay another, well, obviously 6 each, and so on and so forth. And so within 5 months, you'd gone from 1 mite to I don't know how many billions. Like, so you had to get them back, as you were saying, at the percentage, get them back when they were like 3 to 5%. So you're in with a chance, because I'm figuring by the time they're 2 to 1 outnumbering your bees, you're in trouble in winter.
Yeah, that's right. I have seen it where my mite levels have been low, and then I've had more trouble with that hive. And I've seen it where my mite levels have been out of control, very high, and that hive continues to purr along quite nicely. And so that, that has to be something to do with how infectious with viruses that the mites are. I guess there's going to be that opportunity for us to entertain that some mites just aren't transmitting as many viruses. They're not dirty mites, I guess, and then some are. So yeah, it's not always foolproof. You can always just judge by the numbers, but you just have to say to yourself, yeah, okay, well, virus, we have viruses before we had mites. So beehives have viruses, but certainly when you have something such as the Varroa destructor spreading them, then it increases the viral load. So you just have to conclude that the more I can keep this mite level low all year long, especially all year, the greater strength that hive is going to have to be a good honey producing hive, brood production, and make it through a winter. Yeah, absolutely. That's what you got to fall back on.
Yeah, no, I think that seems to be the message across the board. I mean, beekeeping is going to get a little bit more involved and into the brood box a bit more. There is a lot of conversation about the screen bottom board that you mentioned earlier. I don't know. Some people say that they're not going to worry too much about it. Is it more helpful when you're doing kind of, I guess, natural control of the mites to monitor them and perhaps get them on a sticky mat or something under the screen? Whereas if you're just going all down the chemical aisle, I'm not sure. My jury's out. I'm thinking about doing a bit of each, so I'm not sure which way I should go.
Yeah, I think most of us feel that a screen bottom board, it does have a tiny, slight advantage. I mean, obviously, if you put a sticky board under a screen bottom board, you're going to see mites there. Mites are going to fall. And so there's the concept that, the belief that if they fall to the bottom board that's solid, then the mite can just hang out there and wait to grab a leg of a bee to jump on when they walk by. But if you have a screen bottom board, then the mite that does fall off, it's going to fall out of the hive into a food chain of other insects and bugs down there. So, there is that. But studies have been done and shown that the screen bottom board it's only a slight benefit. It's not a one and done thing. That's right. Because we used to test for mites using a sticky board, and we kind of felt like that was I remember doing it because that was the only way that people did it back then. But it's kind of misgiving if you stop and think about it, because if you look at your sticky board and you don't hardly see any mites at all, you might conclude that, oh, good, I don't have a lot of mites. But what you might have are mites that are hanging on really well, and they're just not losing grip. Or you really don't have a number of how many bees are up there and how many mites may be falling off or hanging on to those bees. So if that's all you had to use, then it might be okay. But an alcohol wash is kind of the standard that everybody uses here to measure 300 bees. And so, yeah, screen bottom boards, I do use them on some of my hives, majority of my hives, I would say. I like it for the ventilation, and they don't beard as much when it's hot outside. And I leave them open in the wintertime. But I do notice that when I leave when I put something under there, like I'm doing I'm burning mites off now. So before I put Formic Pro on, I will put a sticky board under there occasionally, just so I get the pleasure of sliding that out and seeing thousands of dead mites. That's so rewarding. I don't have to do that, but I want to see, wow, yeah, look at all those dead mites, right? And then I'll wait a couple of weeks and I'll retest the hive to see how well the Formic Pro did. But that really has worked well for me, the Formic Pro pads, because it kills mites below the cap cells. And I like that. A lot of the other treatments don't. You have to treat them longer to catch different generations.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting little bug, that's for sure. I'm optimistic. At least we're late to the party, is my thought pattern at the moment. You guys have been through a whole lot of stuff, so we shouldn't have to at least go through the chemical toxations that you mentioned earlier about. Oh lordy, we've gone and killed the queen, and I'm sure that happened a few times, or at least damaged her. And so hopefully we don't have to do all of that, and we can just import the actual proper chemicals that work. And so you're trying to do a little bit more natural control of these little blighters as well in amongst the whole thing.
I am. I teach people that, integrated pest management is something that I think is very good. And at the kind of like, you want to start off using things that you can do that might help control mites that don't require the treatment just yet. So, you can try to get a better stock of queen that does show some resistance. We don't have a queen yet that is 100%, the hive is mite resistant. We don't have that. But we are seeing signs that there are some queens that do show that they are able to have less mites because of how they are. But that's one way to start with. And then you can go up the pyramid, I guess, and you can start thinking about, okay, how can I manage mites with mechanical methods like we talked about? Screen bottom board, a green drone comb is a good way to do it. Powdered sugar dustings force some of the mites to fall off occasionally, and breaking the queen's brood cycle when mites are most reproductive. Those elements can really reduce mites quite nicely. And then, but you can test and monitor, and if they start climbing up, then you have to say, well, I got to bring out the big guns. I got to put something in there because these methods aren't working for me. But a lot of times, like myself, I like the hive I looked at a couple of days ago. I haven't had time. I just haven't had the ability to get in there and control mites and watch it. So I always say we should look in our hives about every 30 days and do a mite test. That will give us a measurement of what's trending, because mites are going to be reproducing on the emerging bees every 21 days. So every 30 days we're going to see a trend, and we can take action against it. But in reality, life gets in the way and things happen. You don't always make your schedules, and so something can get out of whack, and you get a hive or two with a lot of mites in it. So, but yeah, I think a backyard beekeeper with a hive or two has the time to go out there and test every 30 days, and then monitor the growth and expansion of mites, and then start low with natural ways. And then if you can't keep that, if you see it growing, then you gotta get ahead of the game.
Yeah, because they're very unforgiving little critters when I do the numbers on how quick they can multiply.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And especially going into like the fall, as the numbers of bees go down, and if the mites are already highly populated, well, of course, the number of mites per bee goes up. I would, exponentially, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And I've found that about in the month of August, it's pretty much where we have, I'd say, August, the mites are expanding very rapidly. Wow. And then September and October, right now, and here our bees are slowing down because of cooler weather, shorter days, less nectar. But the mites are increasing because the hive is heavily populated. So right now, the mites, uncontrolled, the mites will outbrood the bees by far. So you'll have many more mites in your hive than you have bees, because there's about, I think, 2.6 mites emerge out of each cell. So from the founder's mite. So you just have this expansion of mites like you're talking about. It's just Some people will notice that. They'll say, well, I started out the year, mites were pretty low, but now they're just like, I counted 30 or 40 hives out of 300 bees, you know? So it's just breathtaking how fast they can expand.
Yeah, no. And my thought is that, of course, when you've got the winter bees that are going to not be reproducing, so they're just overwintering, and I'm assuming that the mites will be feeding on that particular bee and weaken them. And is that why the colony dies? So, well, obviously lots of reasons, but it actually wipes out the wintering bees as well because the mite is on them.
It's a good question. I don't know. We have a lot of reasons that we attribute winter die-outs, and there's a lot of factors. But for me personally, what I've noticed here in my state of Illinois, we'll have very cold days. Sorry to have to use Fahrenheit, but it gets down to 20 below Fahrenheit chill factor sometimes on windy nights and all. So there are times that bees are in a very cold climate. But, our bees are able to get through cold weather. It's not the cold that really hurts them. It's going to be low population. So bees can stay warm, as you know, clustering together. So if the mites spread viruses, we believe that those viruses are cutting the bee's life in half. So if you have a winter bee that lives 4 to 8 months, so, they're late, the eggs are laid in October, November, they're going to make it into the spring. But if they have high mite counts and high viral loads, those winter bees, the viruses are going to cut their life short. So they're going to make it only 4 months. That's going to be like into the last month of winter, the colonies just begin to crash from low numbers. So as the bees die, you're losing your heaters. That's really the bad thing. The cluster gets smaller. They can't maintain the heat anymore, and they perish on the last little frame of honey in there. They may have a lot of honey, but they just can't stay warm enough. So it's a combination of the mites, the viruses that have reduced and caused the bees to die, and the bees get so small in number that they perish. And a lot of people ask me, hey, I lost my hive, David. I open it up. There's about a baseball, softball sized cluster of bees. What do you think they died from? Instantly, I know, well, there wasn't enough bees to stay warm for winter. So a lack of population is why they died. Well, what was the lack of population from? We really don't know. You could have had a poor laying queen in fall and all your summer bees died, but she failed to lay winter bees. Or it could be that something like the viruses from mites slowly caused them to have a sublethal effect and they died on first few months of winter. It's really hard to tell, but normally we always want to point our finger to the mites. People ask me, what do you think killed my bees in the winter? The first question is, show me what you did for mites during the season. And if they say, well, I didn't have mites, I didn't see any, well, then I can't go any further to evaluate anything. I have no reason to guess anymore because I'm going to say mites then, because you don't know what the mite numbers were. Now, if you told me you kept them at 1% all year long, okay, let's look for other options. What else could have killed them?
Yeah, so the mites are basically the first go-to, and then work out from there.
Exactly. Yeah, they're the first go-to because they have that history, they have that reputation of killing bees by spreading viruses, and they're the most easiest to control. I think you can count them, you can see them with your eyes, you can take a number, you can kill them, you can retest and say, okay, good, my numbers are low.
Now, there's an interesting comment. They're the easiest to control. I like there's a glimmer of hope for us here in Australia. Like once you get your head around it all, they're actually trackable and like you say, controllable.
Oh yeah, I find we have small hive beetle. Do you have small hive beetle in Australia?
We do, but luckily down here where I am, it's a little bit too hot for them to overpopulate during the season.
Oh, wow.
Because they go out and lay in the sand and get cooked. So it's kind of good.
Okay. Yeah, right. Well, to me, I can control my mites easier than I can control small hive beetle.
Yeah. There you go.
Because I can just throw something in the hive and burn off my mites, right? It's hard for me to burn off my small hive beetle. I have to trap them. I really don't. I mean, some people can use or do use chemicals. I don't know if it's legal, but some people try to throw stuff in there to kill beetles. But it's hard to kill that big of a bug on a bee, whereas mites, you have a little more ability to control them. So yeah, I find that it's much more difficult to control small hive beetle than the Varroa destructor.
Well, there you go. Yeah, because those hive beetles, my lord. I mean, up in New South Wales, where this whole incursion's getting excited, they just are out of control, get slimed out. I've never
Oh,
had a
oh,
slimed out hive, so luckily for us down here, it's good. But
yeah,
they are hectic. I have got a few in some hives when they, do the trap thing. And other
yeah.
thing I find interesting with them is when you pull the lid off, and the girls have got them in a little corner of the top of the box or something, and then they're everywhere, and it's almost like the bees are going, "Oh, you stupid human! We just got them all in a
Oh, yeah,
protected
absolutely.
zone, and they've run everywhere." And I almost feel like the bees are looking at me, going, "You idiot!"
Oh yeah, absolutely. But the bees though, they are keeping them in those propolis gels, but the problem is the bees are still feeding them in
Yeah.
gel. That's what's so aggravating. And I mean, bees don't know any better. They tickle the antenna, and all at once they give food to them. But yeah, you're right. As soon as we open it up, they just run everywhere, and it's like wow. I was looking at a frame today. I didn't get this on camera. My beetles, and particularly 2 hives that have the most beetles right now. Some of my hives have like 3 beetles. You smash them, you're done, you're out of there. But a couple of them are like really battling their beetles, chasing them around. But they're always against the wall, the honey frame against the wall, right? So I picked this frame up and I'm holding it on camera and I'm looking at it and I see all these beetles on it. So I got this idea that I'm going to go shake the bees off. And then I'm going to see if I can shake the bees off. Maybe the beetles won't fall off. Sure enough, I shook the bees off. Maybe some beetles fell off, but it was just full of beetles and no bees. So then I just smacked that honey frame on a piece of metal, and all the beetles fell down there. And I had the pleasure of just smash, 30 or 40 beetles just off of one frame. It was so pleasurable. It was just like, wow. So yeah, I mean, they're just a little bit frustrating because you feel like if I can kill a beetle, then maybe it's a mama beetle that won't lay eggs, and I can save this hive from being overtaken by beetles. That's what you're always trying to do.
Yeah, I tell you what, they're not that easy to crush either, because you're chasing them along, and especially if they're on the frame, and then all of a sudden they disappear into a honey cell, and then it's like you see them wriggle back out, and you go, right.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was fascinated too. This particular hive was really chasing them. I mean, I get ready to smash a beetle. Maybe I had it on an upside down top cover, and I could see it walking across, and I was going to smash it. Well, there's a bee jump to the scene and starts grabbing it, and you don't want to smash a bee while you're trying to smash a small beetle, and they're just everywhere. Yeah.
Oh no, they're rotten critters. Oh, golly gosh. I think that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's a matter of control and management and across the board with beekeeping.
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, small hive beetle, for me, they're a secondary pest where I live. So I can control them if I wasn't so lazy. Now, if I start my season off and I put 2 traps in each deep hive body and a trap or 2 in my honey supers when I put those on, you know what? If I made that effort, I would really cut down on my beetles drastically in number. But what happens is I go out there and I inspect. I don't see any. I'm like, okay, I don't have to put beetle traps in here. Next time I go out there, I see 4, and I try to smash 2 of them. And then before long, you got 20 or 30. So it's my fault that I think, oh, I could have brought this under control better by starting off with a way that the bees could run them into these oil traps, because they work so beautifully for me. I've tried the Swiffer pads, and they do work. I mean, when I put those in my hive, beetles are getting stuck in there, but a lot of them I still have to kill them. But then I just found the oil traps work better for me in between the frames.
Yeah, no, they are quite effective. Not that I've got a lot of beetles, but yeah, they do work really quite well. The girls seem to chase them into there, and they pop. And they're usually in there doing breaststroke or something for a little bit, the bugs, and you pull them up and you go, drown, you little beast.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And if you ever get to playing with the small hive beetle larvae, they're atrocious. They're just those little things are just unbeatable. I mean, you can soak them in alcohol and try to kill them, and it's hard to defeat those little larvae that are crawling around in your hive.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It is.
We've got some people that might want to ask us some questions as well, so we'll give that a go. Ben's got a question for us. Ben Wellesley has about 40 hives and is still a newbie to beekeeping. Just like to know about Varroa treatments and toxins in the wax and honey from the treatments. There you go. That's what David was talking about earlier. You can reiterate that for Ben if you would like.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. We have a lot of treatments that are available here in the U.S., and so we always look to the treatments, then see what the label says. We have federal label laws we have to follow, and so if we see that the label says we cannot have honey supers on while we're treating, we have to follow that label. So there are a lot of treatments that require us to take the supers off for that very reason. We just don't want that chemical or vapor, fumes, or anything to be tracked into the honey. But on the other hand, we do have several now that we can use with the honey supers on. And Formic Pro, formic acid, that's one of the main reasons I use it, because I just don't want to have to figure out where to put my honey supers if I take them off the hive. My beetles will take them over, for one thing. But so I just fall back on the things that right now I have to use, because if I have honey supers off, then I can go to other types of treatments. I think it's good to not get stuck on one type of treatment. I think it's better to have a rotation of treatments. So you'll have to think through, okay, I'm going to try to cut my mites down using a treatment before I put supers on. And then once I, put my supers on, and if I still need to keep my mites under control, I'm going to use something that I can treat with supers on. And then when I harvest, I'll be back to a third different treatment because my supers are off. And so, yeah, there's plenty of treatments available that don't affect, like Formic Pro. They say there's more formic acid in the honey itself than what could get in there and from the treatment itself. So that's something we don't really worry about.
Cool. And what have we got? Louise would like to know, how would you do a sticky mat with a flow hive? Well, that's a good question. If you've got I could almost answer that myself. If you've got the newer version, they have actually got a screen bottom board and a mat that you can slide in and out, or a tray. And I guess you could cheat and you could just put a little bit of oil in that, I guess, or whatever the mites drown in.
That's true.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I mean, mine has that same kind of, I think I have the newer one too, that I could just supplement whatever that little screen thing is there. I could take that out and slide some sticky board in there and try to catch them. Yeah.
So that's almost, I think if I read on the Flow Hive article, that's kind of why they developed that bottom, like the screen bottom board, to sort of get ahead of the curve. Well, obviously Flow Hives go around the entire planet anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it's just my personal opinion. I mean, I don't have the corner of knowledge. Don't think that way. But I'm just not one that's very dependent upon a sticky mat, a sticky board at all. I just have learned that a alcohol wash is so simple to perform, and just take 300 bees, alcohol wash them, count the number of bees. You take those bees off of the brood nest area where you're going to have a greater chance to catch the most mites. And that's going to give you a real accurate number right there. You know how many bees they're coming off of. You have a mathematical equation to do there. So that's better for me than trying to look at that sticky board.
Yeah, for sure. I reckon that's what I've read too. Obviously, with the doing the actual alcohol wash with your 300 bees, and you're talking about getting them off, you're not picking each bee individually off the frame, are we? We're shaking them into a pot or something and then scooping them up.
Yeah, So I've made several videos where I've demonstrated a couple of methods. Many years ago, I showed how I would take a jar, and if you hold your frame up long ways, you can actually pull the jar down, and the bees would just tumble into the jar. And so I saw videos last couple of years where people were shaking the nurse bees into like a empty nuke box or something, and then they would just scoop out 300 out of there. But that seems like that's a little bit more work for me. I really like just pulling the little cup backwards down a frame and let the bees tumble into it till it's filled up, and then put them in alcohol. I made a video, I think 2 days ago, where I showed exactly how I did that. Very simple. You can do an alcohol wash in less than 1 minute, 60 seconds. You could drop them into the cup, and then put them in the alcohol, slosh them around, count the numbers. Less than a minute, you've got an count. But you just want to be sure you don't ever get your queen in there. You got to know where that queen is before you start testing and killing bees.
I guess at least you get a brood break if you kill the queen.
You would get a 30-day brood break. That's true. Yeah, you would.
Might not be advantageous, just quietly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Michael's got a question for us, and he says, in our mostly mild climate, would the mites affect our winter bees as much?
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't really, small hive beetle are the same way. Small hive beetle and the Varroa destructor mite, they hang out with the bees. They hang out on the bees, so no matter if it's winter or not, the mites are in there. But if you have less brood during the winter, but of course, the mites can't reproduce as much as they can, during a big brood increase during spring or summer. But the mites are still in there. And the queen's always going to be laying some in the wintertime to keep the hive going. So the mites are going to be taking advantage of that. And it might be even worse because whatever little brood there is in there, those mites are going to be diving in on all of them, perhaps. So, I'd like to think that the winter wouldn't be so bad. It'd be better. A lot of people say I'm going to get rid of my small hive beetle when winter will kill them all off. And that doesn't happen that way at all. They overwinter quite nicely in the cluster.
Yeah, well, the bees manage to keep everything at a nice temperature. So I guess that's why the hive beetles are half the reason why the mice will turn up sometimes, because it's nice and warm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Roughly how long does a mite live? There you go. That's an interesting question. That's my own question.
Oh, yeah. I'd have to Google that. I know that information. I always jokingly tell people, I'm a master beekeeper, so I've studied all of that material so long that I've forgotten about half of it. And that's one thing that I just don't have at my fingertips. But they go through several seasons, several generations that without killing them. I'm going to take a guess. There's people smarter than me that are going to tell me that I'm wrong or right, but I'm going to say that they could probably make it through about, I don't know. Wish I had my book in front of me.
That's all right. I put you on the spot. It doesn't matter. It's all good. Yeah. Wildwood Honeybee Farm has a question for us. He's asking, hey, David, what is your opinion on the guardian beetle entrance that keeps beetles out of the hive? Brought some and they work pretty good. Just wondering about your opinion on them.
Yeah, I've never used them. I've heard about them. I think if it's the one I'm thinking of, the beetle is not really allowed to or able to walk across something or in there. But I think I remember that thinking about it, that I thought, oh, look, I think it wouldn't be as effective because I think the beetles could easily fly in the same way that bees fly into the hive. And so a lot of these things where we're trying to keep beetles out of the hive because they can't go around a sharp corner or flat piece of something. Remember, they have wings. And so a beetle is very easily going to get into a hive the same way that a honeybee gets into the hive.
Well, that's a very good point. Yes. They might not be the most aerodynamic little creature, but they can fly.
They do fly. Yeah. You start to kill one and it lifts off, and there it goes flying away. And so they're quite good. Most beetles fly. Most beetles have wings. Some beetles don't fly like they fly more like chickens fly. But most beetles can fly quite nicely. And small hive beetle, unfortunately, does fly. They fly quite a few miles sometimes just to get to a hive. Yeah.
Great. Get into the wind and off.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it great the jolly insects that just know how to implement themselves?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think we had small hive beetle in America until I believe it was 89. I don't remember the exact year, but it was in the 80s when small hive beetle finally made their way here. And boy, they didn't take long to spread around the country either. Crazy.
No, it's amazing how quick stuff spreads, isn't it?
And
that's the other thing that's going on down here at the minute is the whole border, shutting the borders and letting beekeepers do the migratory beekeeping thing that goes on. And I don't know. I was looking at it, I'm thinking, what happens with the swarms that just get on a container or a back of a car, or if you run through a swarm in your car? I guess a mite can live on a dead bee for a little bit and then get to the other side on a car or something. I don't know. what would be your rough opinion? You can't get in too much trouble because you're the other side of the world about like migratory beekeeping, as in the quickness of the spread. Would you read some history, or like maybe stop people trying to do each other a damage?
Yeah, I think in America here we just don't. I mean, when people take bees to be pollinating almonds and such, we have good Department of Ag that wants to make sure there's borders, there's ways that people will monitor that they're not bringing in bad things and such. That's in place. But yeah, with reality of like the Varroa destructor, people buy packages here. They'll have packages shipped to them from a southern state all across the U.S. And there's no way to control how many mites or even beetles are in those packages. And so they're going to be in there. That's just all it is to it. The package B person could, treat with something to try to cut down on that, but they're going to be there. So migratory beekeeping in the U.S. is much the same way. We've always felt like that, some of the things that, if we see a weird American or Africanized hive that was caught in a northern state, that's like, oh, that was weird. So usually it's being transported migratory out of the South or a package, something like that. Those things are just inevitable. That is just going to be, like you said, impossible. I feel impossible that could ever been policed or controlled.
Yeah, I'm on the same page, and I just think it is what it is in the end. And we just the mites are going to turn up anyway. Most people I've talked to, regardless of it was, I don't know, it kind of slowed them down. That was about all. They just get ready because here they come.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think you'd be wiser, in my opinion, is to take the time to educate yourself on controlling mites. What can you do to keep the levels low all year long? What can you do to implement procedures right now to test for them, to watch, and then react with a treatment? What treatments are available? What treatments can you use, either integrated pest management or legal treatments? And study that, get to know the mite and how to take care of it. That would be where I'd put my energy if I lived where you live.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm doing. I've just decided it's inevitable, and I need to just do my research. Hence, I'm talking to you and sharing this with the rest of Australia and the world. And Lynn would like to know, what are your thoughts on the new system that's coming out of Israel that treatments for you? Like, as in, I think she's talking about there's a special little oxalic acid that just doses every couple of weeks or days.
I've seen that for several months now, and I've seen some reports saying that it's worked really well. I think they've been testing it here in America, and it has good results. I'm at a little bit of a loss because we have so many laws about how you administer the treatment, and that we have to follow that. And so I don't know if my question about that particular device is, whatever treatment you put in there, and I think you can put different kinds of treatment that it vaporizes or pushes it out at critical times. I think the treatment companies would have to come up with a dosage. They'd have to come up with, if you're going to use it in this particular device, this is the dosage. I don't believe it's legal for us to get that and then put any kind of a dosage amount we want to in there and hope for the best. So it's kind of difficult for us to wait on things to get legalized and be tested, and so the beekeeper can use them. And that's one of the things that I have a question about. That you can get a license to test it, you can get licensed to experiment with it, but for the average beekeeper to grab that and start putting things in it, I can't see that would be a legal use of any kind of treatment that we have. Because if it's not on the label, you can't use anything off that's not written in that label. So the device looks promising. I kind of like how it is presented so far. I just need to see more data, and I need to see the legal dose catch up with us.
Yeah, no, my thought when I thought it looks like a pretty cool idea. I'm not sure what it's going to cost. That'd be my other thought. But I also was, you still have to do your monitoring to make sure you're not just treating for the heck of treating. Otherwise, the next thing you know, you're going to have a resistant mite to the treatment, and then that's not what you want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you still got to test. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not an excuse not to monitor.
Yeah.
Here's a good question. In your neck of the woods, Alex has got a question for us. He is going to ask, how far do bees fly to forage?
Yeah, here in where I live, my bees are going to fly the shortest distance they have to get the most amount of nectar. And that's every honeybee, every Apis mellifera is going to do that. Now, some studies have been done to see how far bees could fly if they had to. And I think I've read studies that show bees will fly 8 to 12 miles sometimes. But they've done experiments putting bees in the desert and then putting flowers on a trailer and keep moving it to see how far they'll go. But there's a point, where bees are going to consume whatever nectar they have on board just to make it back. It's just a point of no return of bringing back any nectar. So bees are smart enough. But bees can fly upwards of 20 plus miles an hour, so they can get somewhere pretty fast. But yeah, my bees are usually going within 2 to 3 miles. Is a very easy way for bees to hit a nectar source and bring it back, make many, many, many trips a day.
Yeah, that's my usual rule of thumb as well. About 5 kilometers down here in Oz, it's sort of about, but it is amazing how far they can fly. It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
And Alex Nelson's got a question for us. Would a 50-kilometer exclusion zone at the borders of New South Wales protect the other states? Here we go. This is the original. This is our conversation a little bit earlier. So
that's going to be a question that you have to answer.
Exactly right. I think, personally, I would like to believe that we could protect the other states, but I think the only one in with a chance at the minute is Tasmania and WA, because they're a long way away from anybody. But even there, I don't know how they'll get on.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with the Varroa mite too. I don't know I don't have any science behind this, but where I live out in the country. I don't have anybody close by me. And there's some years that we'll have worse mosquitoes. There's some years we'll have worse small hive beetle population. And then the next year, you don't hardly see any beetles, or you have very few mosquitoes. And I've found that to be true with my Varroa mites too. There are some years that I battle a lot higher numbers of Varroa mites. And then other years I see lower populations of Varroa mites in my hive. And, it's seasonal, cyclical. I don't know. It just seems like that even though we may feel like, oh no, they're going to be everywhere. They're going to be the same, I guess, at the same threshold everywhere. It can vary from year to year of what the pressure points are.
Yeah, well, I guess it's like any insect, isn't it? Or even with the bees, sometimes they vary from year to year for the seasons.
Absolutely, yeah. I make nukes up every year, and there's some years that I can make up nukes like by doing nothing. They're just like bees everywhere. And then other springs, I had to battle to get enough nukes made up. I looked up online, and I was going to say 6 months, and I was right. The mites will live about 6 months life cycle.
Right, there you go. That's a fair effort. Goodness gracious.
That's the whole season, right?
Exactly right. And so if people want to find out some more information about your YouTubing and your information, David, how do they... We'll put some links in, obviously, in this episode, but what's the best place for them to track you down?
Yeah, my website is honeybeesonline.com. Kind of easy to remember, honeybeesonline.com. And if you want to find me on YouTube, you can just pop onto YouTube and then type in David Burns Beekeeping, and I'm sure I'll come up.
Look at that. That's pretty straightforward. I like it.
Yeah, right.
Beekeeping online. Awesome.
honeybeesonline.com.
Yep. Yeah, awesome. And your wife makes a few products in the background, so they can. Have you got a website for that for sales and?
Well, we used to be really big on selling every product known to man on beekeeping, but we as we get older and as we focus more on education and my YouTube channel, we're selling less and less products. So we're trying to minimize the products that we carry, and it's mainly just the feeder boards that I've invented to help feed bees in the winter, spring, and summer. But we have a few items, but honeybeesonline.com, but they're in such demand that we're always out of stock. It's so hard for us to keep items in stock and supplied. So we try to do our best, but you know how that goes.
I do know how it goes. There's only so much. What is it? Time, money, and energy rules the world that we live in.
That's so true. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
No, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning or this evening, depending on which part of the planet we're in.
Well,
David, you've been a wealth of information. It's been a fabulous to have a chat. And I wish you all the best. And I'm sure you'll watch us with interest from over the other side of the world to see how we get on.
I do. And I want to let people know that I first saw one of your videos, and you got my attention when your accent and you were painting a bunch of boxes out there and having a ball doing it. And I thought, oh, I love this guy. He's so fun to watch.
Cool. Awesome, David. Thank you very much.
All right,
It's
Mark.
been
Take
great.
care. Thanks for having me.
Easy. Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, very good. Thanks for joining us for that live chat. David's a good bloke. Don't forget to look up his website. And, I tell you what, this Varroa Mite excitement is coming to us all. Thanks for joining us.